Okay, learning German as an identity quest, Erikson's life cycle and identity-based motivation. Okay, today I will try to convince you the most important question that you have to ask yourself as a German learner and as a person is, who am I? Easy question, very difficult, and always changing answer. If you had asked me 10 years ago, 15 years ago, or probably even 2 years ago, you would have gotten a very different answer each time. Um, there will never be a final answer to this question, not in language learning and not in life. Um, what we do, we move through shifting identities through, I'll explain the word later, mama cycles they are called. I will get into the terms, what the MAMA stands for later. I didn't want to annoy you with terms from the very beginning. Those mama cycles are like exploration, stabilization, exploration, stabilization. And that is how life these days goes on. And it used to be a little more stable. Now, like life is more shifting in the 21st century. And I think, as some of you have noted, and something that I've also realized in the last couple of years, is that learning a language, for some people, it's really just acquiring a skill, and there's not really that much happening. But for a lot of other people, I think this learning a language has a very different um, influence in their life. And for some people, and it's probably the majority of people, I think learning a new language and moving to a new country can sometimes quite brutally reveal which life conflicts we have not yet fully resolved. And some of you have talked about how this course has brought up some questions and had like some real like interesting moments. And I think that has to do with this, that like when we learn a new language, and I have a quote there in a second, there's just something we have to question what is, who we are, and a lot of things start moving around. And I think when we are in the process of learning a language and we do have this challenge come up, there's like some doubts coming up, some problems coming up, some really intense, I don't know, like feelings of inadequacy. There's a lot of things that we've talked about here in this course. And you can either accept this challenge and use it for growth, or you can reject the challenge and you can abandon the project of learning a language, which then very often means that you are stagnating in a certain way because you have not, accepted the challenge that was presented and laid before you when you started learning this language. So I hope that you will actually accept this challenge and use it for personal growth and not only linguistic growth.
Ostrais.
Hey, Sydney.
Hi.
Um, I start with a kind of famous quote by Charlemagne. In German, it's actually called Karl der Große, Karl the Great. Um, and he said in the 8th century, to have another language is to possess another soul. And basically, if we take this literally, and if we take what we talked about last week with the German parts, so basically, my theory is that we as people go through a life and we have like the life cycle, but also like the German part or whatever language we learn, they also have a certain life cycle and they go through stages and they have certain conflicts and they have to resolve these conflicts. And that's what we're looking at today. The question is, do German parts or our foreign language parts also have a life cycle? And we'll get there back in a second. Um, and to come back to this thesis is, I think a lot of you have noted that like when you start learning a language, you often feel like little children again. Not like 1 year olds, but I don't know, like maybe a 6 year old, a 7 year old, like a young kid. That process is called a regression, that you kind of like fall back in a like a state of mind or like feelings that you felt you already overcame. And the first thing that we need when we learn a foreign language, we need to be competent in the language and receive recognition by peers, by the teacher, by our friends for that competence. So we need to develop self-efficacy and self-esteem. That's the first step. That's like what you do like on a A level, basically. Later, then in the B level, and we connect this later with the Deutschberg, we then need to discover who we want to be in this new language and culture, which is my own vision, is who do I want to be, and who others see me as becoming, which is the vision of other people, of my peer group, the country where I'm living. Yeah. And both things, who we want to be and who others see me as becoming, is something that I can discover. I have to, there's no other way of doing this, through interaction with people. And then finally, we must accept, and now we come into a later stage, we must accept who we have become in this language, to grow into the role, to appreciate people who once felt foreign, and to connect with the culture and the society around us. Um, and only when I know who I am can I truly begin to love myself. And for others, that means in order to like really feel well in Germany for us now, I first have to know who I am before I can actually, start appreciating others as much. Um, we'll get back there in a second. Okay. So, and I like this phrase. In German, it's Klarheit vor Kompetenz, clarity before competence. What do I mean by this? And I think a lot of people start learning a language and there's not a lot of clarity. Where do I want to go? Who do I want to be? And they're just like, oh, I want this. I want to learn this. Okay. But since it's not really 100% clear where you want to go, who you want to be, then you run into problems. But I believe if you really look into the identity question, yeah, then things become much, much clearer. For one is you see clearly the goal and the path toward it. That's what we've been working on a lot here. Yeah. Second, you'll find the will to act. I think that's been for like a lot of you, you experience a lot of problems like I just not really, I think I'm motivated, but I'm not really. Yeah, so you very often people don't find the will to act. And the third thing is also when you are clear where you want to go, is you'll overcome difficulties by understanding this is difficult because it is important and not because it is impossible. Yeah. That is also, we'll get a little bit deeper into this in a second. And those three things, knowing where to go, finding the will to act, and overcoming difficulties, has been covered by something that is very fascinating, and I don't want to spend too much time on it. There's something called identity-based motivation. It's a theory that was developed over the last, I don't know, like 40 years, I would say. And the main question of this identity-based motivation, it was developed in the United States, and the woman developing it, Daphna Oyserman, she was actually she was working with high school, or like middle school kids, I believe, and other than people thought, like pretty much all the kids in there wanted to go to college. They wanted to have a good life. They wanted to have like a solid job, a good income. They basically had very similar dreams about the future. However, so the question is like, if we all have this goal, and in our case, we all have the goal of speaking German and like living in Germany and like being, integrated and being like having friends. So the question is like, why, if we all have the same dream and those kids all have the same dream, why did some of them make it and some of them did not make it? And for a long time, it was believed, well, if you don't have it was people didn't have the dream or people didn't have that goal and that's why they didn't get there. But she said, no, no, they all have the same goal. And so it's with German learners, we all have the same goal. Some make it, some don't. What happens? And you see like the rotten bridge. What happens in the middle? And the question is, well, do people like they procrastinate, they underinvest, they make all kinds of choices that hurt their future self? But why are they doing that? So the source of the gap, as is written below, is not the lack of aspiration and not a lack of goal. The source is that the future selves are not experienced as relevant in the present moment. Nice line. Seeing it is not being it. Knowing who you want to be doesn't get you there. Yeah. So there's three aspects of this identity-based motivation, and we don't find a lot of answers to this today. However, I want to like later give you four questions I would like you to keep thinking about. Much more we can't really do at this point, just asking questions. But there's three aspects of it. One is psychological relevance. That goal has to be relevant for you. Then the readiness to act. It's what I just said before. And the interpretation of experienced difficulty. Yeah, those are the three aspects, and I'll get into them now a little bit more in detail. Um, the first mechanism is the psychological relevance. Yeah, the problem for that we have the exactly this was made for like middle schoolers, but I think we have exactly the same problem. We start learning a language, and the me as a German speaker is pretty far away. It might be a year ago, a year away, or 2 years away, but it is far. Yeah, and so the question then is, how can I keep this idea of me being that who I want to be, how can I keep this present? Because the further away it is, the more difficult it is to get there and to like, marshal the discipline to get there. So the first question, and I'll have those questions laid out later, is how can I keep this distant future present every day? And that is a real challenge, as I know from my German classes. Um, the mechanism number two is the readiness to act. And here it's the question, they call it here the people like me filter. And the question here is when I have to study, when I have to get somewhere, um, the things that I have to do, is this something for a person like me? Am I a person who would do this? And here we're getting like all kinds of like racial identities that people have, cultural identities, family identities, and very often academic achievement and language achievement, they come actually like, oh, in my family, we're not people who learn foreign languages. Or I don't know, like yeah, in my family, we're not very good with languages. Like all kinds of things that like predetermine if you are like more prone to letting it go, or like if you like, really, really get in there. Yeah. So the question here is this a strategy for a person like me? And that's actually, and I think we've talked a lot about this in this course, that like people started like studying German in a way, started speaking in German way that I felt when like listened to people was not very identity congruent. I felt like, are you really a person who like, is that how you want to study? Is that how you want to progress? Is that really what you're interested in? Um, so that is a really, so the match between who I think I am and what I'm doing and where I want to go, that is a really important aspect of learning a language, or actually here getting, through high school and to college. Yeah. And students that view their careers as more education dependent, they spend more time on homework and earn better grades than those viewing their careers as education independent, which is basically, yeah, that's in my family, we don't go to college kind of thing. So like they spend less time doing it. It's kind of obvious, but I think for us that's also really relevant. And number three, this is the dual meaning of difficulty, and that is also something that I've encountered a lot. It's basically when something is difficult, then the question is, okay, is this difficult because it's impossible, or is this difficult because it is important? And I've heard this phrase a lot that people say, I'm not good with languages. And when every time I hear this, I'm kind of like, oh, because what it does, it basically shifts you in a mindset of like, okay, this is basically impossible for me. Yeah. So the question is, how do you deal with hardships? Do you decide, no, this is important? Yeah, that's why it's difficult, or is it impossible? And that's the difference between, persevering and quitting. And we make this decision very, very often. This is um, when you wonder why every time you sit down, and I think we had this a couple of weeks ago. Somebody said, "Yeah, every time I sit down, I start hating my German stuff." And I was like, "Okay, that sounds like a real identity problem, yeah? Because you make the decision in that moment that this is not for you. This is not who you are. This is not who you want to be, and so it's hard. So it is." Not worth my time. It is a waste of time. It's probably impossible to do, at least for the person that I am right now. So those are the three mechanisms, and that will leave us with four questions. And I can't find an answer to those questions for you. It's something that you have to ask yourself, just based on what we heard now. And I'll give you a second to discuss those questions. I find the second extremely, extremely difficult. I hope you'll get there. Okay, number one. How could I keep my imagined future as a German speaker vivid and present in my everyday learning life? We all know where we want to get, but how present is this when we actually study, when we do things? Do we, at every time before we study, do we think about who we want to be? Identity-based motivation would actually say if you study and if you spend before that just a little bit of time about who you want to be in this language, you will persevere more and you will be more disciplined. Yeah, so just getting this back in your mind. Yeah, so how could you do this? So draw a vivid picture of this, and then how can I keep this much more, present in my life? Okay, now we come to the second question. I'll just read it, okay? I hope you. Is what I think I have to do to learn the language really what a person like me would do? And now's the catch. And if not, should I change what I think I should do? Or should I change the kind of person I think I am? And I let you read this for a second. Yeah. I think that is the central question that you should ask yourself every time you do some sort of like language related learning activity. Is that something I would do? And if not, do I have to change the activity or do I have to change the way I think about myself? Tricky, tricky question. Question number three. For my actions to feel identity congruent, which identity should I adopt right now so that I'm best prepared for the challenges immediately ahead? Because we can change our identity, we can change the way we think about ourselves, who we think we are. And so, what in the challenge that I have, I mean, like learning German now, yeah, is there something I need to think differently about? I have to like shift my identity a little bit in order to be better so that identity suits better my challenges. And will I have to rethink my identity in the future? And what I'm basically saying, and we get there with Erikson later, is like you have to reinvent yourself as a German learner on your journey, I think several times. And that's probably you've never thought about this as so yeah, it's just me. I'm learning the language. But I think if we adapt and if we change the way we think about ourselves as a language learner, as a language speaker, I think it's a huge impact on how we progress and if we progress. And question number four. What are my typical patterns when difficulties arise? When do I think this is difficult, so it must be important and worth doing? And when do I think this is difficult, so it must be impossible for me? Yeah. So we all face sometimes like, okay, this is really hard, it's really difficult. What is it that keeps you from trying something? And what is it that like keeps you going? And it's a little related to question number two. Okay, and I'll let you discuss these questions now. Hang on, let me just where can I? Okay, okay. Who cares? Okay, well we'll go on. Um, and then number seven, I go quickly because this is not so relevant for us. I just put this in because this is for relevant for me right now. Middle adulthood. This is called generativity versus stagnation, and here it's about preparing the next generation, like being a teacher, having kids. And the question here is, can I make my life count? Yeah, do I prepare the world for what comes after me? Do I transmit stuff? Do I transmit knowledge? And in order to like be able to do this, the resulting virtue then would be care. That actually is a phase that's relevant if you ever work as a language teacher. Yeah, because as a language teacher, you if you are I don't know, for example, if I were an English teacher, yeah, I go through all these phases, and then in the next one, then it's about really the idea of generativity is like preparing the next generation. Or do I keep, that's the idea of stagnation, do I stay I focused on myself, or do I develop this virtue of care, taking care of others, taking my legacy and others to be more important than I am? An experience I heard that for parenting, for example, would be. Yeah. And people like, parents who like leave their kids, basically they fail at this core conflict. And then very often, people would, from an Eriksonian perspective, they would stagnate as human beings. They just keep being focused on themselves. We just call them immature. You see how like this whole path is like a maturation process, or people become more and more mature, more and more, as Erikson would put it, whole. So the radius of the self just keeps expanding, yeah, from like little, just making the sentences, then like, pair groups and out groups. This is the identity where I try to find out who I am. Then it's about devotion and love, loving ourself, also in our context, and then the next generation. So that the self keeps expanding and keeps expanding. And last thing, last slide here. And I think what is really, really, really important here is the identity. The phase number 5, which I think most of you are in. Most of you are like struggling in this. Who am I in this language? Who am I in Germany? What is my role here? And developing a role that is fixed. That's what Erikson calls a fidelity. Yeah. And so you cannot fuse what you haven't formed. I talked already about this, that true intimacy is impossible without a solid identity. If I don't know who I am, yeah, I cannot really bond with someone else. Yeah, I can cling to them, but I cannot really like meet them on eye to eye. And so you cannot give what you don't have. Yeah. And so, according to Erikson, the identity is the psychological capital that buys adult success. Yeah, it is the integrator that moves us to one wholeness, and without the crucial investment of phase 5, the adult architecture, has problems. So it's really the most work is on like, who am I? And I think that is the question I think that a lot of you are trying to find out, to solve. Yeah, and I would so yeah, okay, let's leave it there. Okay, discussion. Let's get you guys in the to discuss about this. Okay. And we stay first, maybe don't because I don't just speak about language learning now, just also speak about like, okay, what is going on in your life? Because we'll get later to the fact, okay, what is the relationship between like my life phase and my language learning phase? So just now, for like the next 7 minutes, just keep talking about your life and not so much about your language learning existence. Which of the above conflicts is currently most central in your life? And I'll give you the slide so you can check again. So which of these conflicts do you think most about? What is central in your life right now? Which of these conflicts would you say you have already resolved? And in which way? Yeah. And how do you know that you've resolved them? And number 3, and now you can come to that, what I just said. What can these stages and conflicts teach us about the process of learning German? And I did speak about this a little bit. Let's see how relevant this is for you. Okay, And then with this, we'll get into the um, okay. Um, I think for most language learners, for most German learners, for most of you here, I think the question of who am I, the identity crisis, the identity versus role confusion, yeah, the knowing who I am in this country, in this language, I think that is probably the biggest challenge. Um, and so when we talk about identity and identity crisis, um, there's always four terms in psychology and sociology that are being used. And I want you to remember those four terms. You will, we'll work through them in the next in the next like 30 minutes or so. They are diffusion. Diffusion is, it's basically you have one axis is exploration. How much do you explore? Yeah. And the other part, the Y, would be the commitment. How strong are you committed or are you not committed? And the idea of identity diffusion means I have not really explored and I'm not really committed to anything. Yeah. I don't really know who I am and I'm also not searching. Yeah. I haven't committed to anything. That is called identity diffusion. We call these identity statuses. An identity status would be diffusion. Okay, the next one, there's a little weird terms, but those are the original terms and they're still being used today. The next one is called foreclosure. That means you are really committed, but you've never really explored. You have prematurely adopted assigned roles, often from parents, without active questioning. You're extremely, the conformity is high. That is, for example, I don't know if you're getting married by the age of 15 and then you have five kids, yeah, and you never really had any time to explore a little bit who you want to be and what you want to do. Yeah, the identification, you identify with your parents, and this identification is never really questioned. Yeah, that is called a foreclosed identity status. And then we come to the next, which is called a moratorium. I don't know if you've ever heard this term. In German, this term means that something is being postponed. You are giving more time. For example, in Germany, we once had the Atommoratorium, and the Atommoratorium said basically we have 10 more years with nuclear energy, and then it is being stopped. That is the idea of a moratorium. That means you're given time to explore. You don't have to commit yet. You don't have to fix something. You have high exploration and you don't have to commit to anything. I would say 95% of people you meet in Berlin are probably in that state. Yeah, they have not committed to anything. They're not committing to any relationship. They are in a state of moratorium. And for example, if we talk about, I don't know if you've ever heard this term, the Peter Pan syndrome, of like mostly it's really referred to men who just can't commit to a woman, to a work, to family. They just cannot be pinned down. Those are people in a moratorium identity status. And as we have discussed earlier, this moratorium status is being expanded and expanded and expanded. It's a little bit something that we've seen in postmodernity in the last 30 years, that this part is getting later and later and later. People just don't commit anymore. They're just exploring and exploring, but they don't really. And eventually, you don't. If you keep looking, if you keep exploring, you will never really know who you are, and you keep changing and you keep shifting. That is called the identity status of moratorium. And then we have the achievement, which is basically you have explored, yeah, a lot, and then you have committed to something. Yeah, that would be the ideal outcome of this identity crisis, high exploration, high commit, yeah, and then you have a self-chosen stable commitment. Yeah. That is the ideal resolution of this crisis. However, most people don't get there. And it is, and something that is really, really clear in the research is if you have an achieved identity status, and there's like certain questionnaires that they do this with, you will have it is much easier later in life to find love, to find care, to get through the other phases if you have an achieved identity status. If you know, which is kind of obvious, if you know who you are, things will probably become easier in life. Yeah. And that is, again, also, I think, really true when we talk about language learning. And so when you know who you are in a country, when you know who you are in a language, in a society, you will probably have a lot of advantages. So what I'm saying is basically this should be a goal. It's not just about learning grammar and this and that. Is actually, I think, the most important thing you want to look at is who am I here? Who can I be? That is what the question that I think we need to focus on. Let's keep looking into this. So we have those four terms: diffusion, foreclosure, achievement, and moratorium. And now we have to like look at different domains in our life. There's Erikson. He named three. That's the four domains of exploration. They're pretty obvious. Number one is job. Yeah, what do I have to do in my job? So we're going. Who am I? One way to answer this is like, what do I do for a living? Yeah. Um, so that is the first, this is called the domain of exploration. Um, so job. Number two would be ideology. And those are the original terms that Erikson also uses. Work, ideology, my values and beliefs. This includes religion, politics, moral frameworks, um, that is your ideology. It's not necessarily a political ideology. It can be the way I see the world. And how defined is the way I see the world. This is the second domain. The third domain that Erikson named was interpersonal, or he just called it love. But here we're calling it interpersonal. This is about intimate relationships, close relationships, friendships, um, all kinds of things that are related to other people. Um, and so what this is a domain that we can explore or not. Yeah, there's I have, for example, friends who basically live in the same town. They've had the same friends for the last 20, 30 years. Yeah, so you can also have there was not much exploration there. That's what I'm saying. So like that's a that's third domain, and the fourth domain then would be the lifestyle. Yeah, the pattern of daily life. There's about recreational choices, about work-life balance, about self-expression. Those is the fourth domain that I put in there. That is not originally named by Erikson, but we still got it in there. Okay, and now I do something really, really quickly. And I want you, we talked about this word mama cycles before. And the mama cycles basically is the idea that the identity development, and this is with Sonia's question early on, it does not end once a stable identity has been formed. Has been like a new adjustment of the theory. It basically people move between periods of exploration and stabilization. And so this is MAMA basically means moratorium, achievement, moratorium, achievement, exploration, stabilization, exploration, stabilization. And those MAMA cycles these days, and they probably have always been triggered by certain events. For example, a career change or a job loss can basically then trigger some more exploration and then later stabilization. Relationships, the ending or the beginning of relationships, obviously can do this. You reorient your life a little bit, becoming a parent. That is something that's happening in my life right now, as you all know. So I will have to like do a little bit in exploration because my life just doesn't continue the way it is. There will be major changes. So I have to reorient myself and find a stable identity as a parent. death of a close person that can be have a major impact on people's lives. Then like a physiological or psychological health crisis. It can be like a depression or burnout or like a really life-changing disease. Then major societal changes like a war or economic crisis, or you have to leave the country, and migration or learning a new language. That is what we are, what most of you have to deal with or potentially have to deal with. You have to, when you one of this happens and you go to another country, you're learning the language, you are basically thrown into an exploration situation. And the question is your identity ready for this? Are you actually in an exploratory mood? Are you actually in a status of moratorium? And we actually may have different identity statuses in different domains of life. And what I would like you to invite now is like think a little bit about your different identity statuses in different domains of your life. Um, Again, always with in the back of our head of like looking, how does this match with what I go through as a language learner? That is what we have, at the end of this process. And I just go through very quickly. There's four, just so you get an idea what I'm talking about. Four statuses of work identity. Diffusion would be you don't really know where you're going with your work. It's not really clear. This is the seventh year you're working as a waiter in a bar. You haven't finished your studies. You're procrastinating. You never taken the final exam. Yeah. So then you are in your work identity, you are in a state of diffusion. Your status is diffusion. Yeah. A work identity foreclosure status would be your parents decided what you would work. It was always clear. You went to high school, you went to school, you did this, and you started working. And I don't know how about you, but I know people like this. My ex-girlfriend, for example, yeah, she was in a foreclosed identity for a long time until she was in her mid-30s, and then it was a huge bang, and she realized that is actually not who I want to be. Yeah, and then from this status of foreclosure, you have a massive implosion, and then you get into the status of a moratorium. Yeah, and then you start searching. Yeah, it can be a crisis, but like, okay, what do I want to be? Who do I want to be? Um, and you try different jobs. And then ideally, this moratorium, this phase of moratorium, this phase of like looking, of experimenting, of searching, will then lead to a identity status of achievement. You know who you are. You're a specialist. You have found your niche. Yeah, you know who you are. People like you, appreciate you for what you do. Yeah, from a personal perspective, that is right now how I feel. I feel like in the last couple of years, I tried a lot of different things. And now what I do now with this like language and psychology, I feel like that is what was made for me. I created this niche for myself. Yeah. And I feel like have like a unique skill set and people appreciate this. And I feel really achieved in this. Yeah. So that would be an example for an achieved identity in the context of work. And like this, we can go through to the other three domains that we have left. In ideological identity, for example, the diffusion identity status would be I don't really have any opinion on politics. I don't really care about it. I've never thought about it. It's just not really relevant for me. Yeah, I don't understand what's going on in the world. I also don't care. Yeah, that would be a diffusion. Foreclosure, I basically took my parents' view in the world, or like from my society or where I come from. That will be the foreclosed identity, the inherited identity as far as ideology goes. Moratorium again, I join three different parties. I go there, I move to different countries. Yeah. I'm wrestling with ideas. Yeah. With religion. My parents are religious. I'm not. what do I do with this? So I'm struggling with this. And then eventually you get to a status of like, I know who I am, I know what I believe, and that is also um, then again the level of achievement, yeah, the status of achievement. And this again, interpersonal identity, it's the same, it's just diffusion. I don't really know who I am, so I'll just go with the flow, which means in relationships and sexuality, they very often more like formal, like the stereotypical. They're not real, that you can't, if you're like in a diffused, you can't really connect because you don't really know who you are. You've never like looked for who you are, who you can be. Yeah. And then it's really difficult to connect with a person. By the way, the spelling mistake is on Notebook LM. The same with the foreclosure. Yeah. It's again traditional values. Commitments are made without exploration. Yeah. Roles from parents or authorities. And then moratorium. And then you get with the wrestling with alternatives and experiencing, doing all kinds of different stuff. Again, this is Berlin. Berlin basically invites you to try this. And then again, you have the achievement. Yeah. I've explored my options and feel secure in my values and who I love and how this goes. And also, again, in the lifestyle identity, again, we have the diffusion, the path of least resistance, yeah. And we have the foreclosure, um, and we have the moratorium. I don't have to explain too much of this, and the achievement. So those are like in the four domains, those four different terms. And now I would invite you to just like discuss a little bit about your life. Do we have time for this? We do. I think we're doing okay. Um, I hope this was not too quick for you. So we have four domains, we have four identity statuses. And I would invite you now. So, which identity status would you assign to yourself in the following four domains? In occupation, in ideology, in interpersonal relationships, and in lifestyle. Which are you like in a diffusion? Are you in a foreclosed? Are you in a moratorium? Or are you in achievement? I hope this was more or less clear. Let's actually wait, one thing. Hang on, let me. Okay. And now we finally, this is Eric. By the way, this is a terrific picture from Erikson walking up the Deutschberg. I, I'm amazed by what ChatGPT could do if you give him like three pictures, and then he turns into Erikson is inviting you to go with him up the Deutschberg. I was blown away by this one. He was a quite a hiker, by the way. So what happens when we combine Erikson theory with the learning phases of the Deutschberg model? That's, I think, an interesting question. And the result should be a clearer understanding of what our path of development looks like as language learners, where we currently are on that path, what we should focus on at this stage. I think that's a huge question. I think a lot of people, when they learn a language, focus on way too many things, all at the same time, and it's not really clear. Okay, what should I be doing right now? What is on an abstract level my goals? Yeah, because if it's clear, for example, that I'm working on self-esteem, I have a pretty clear idea of what I should be doing. If I just think I just have to like do blah, yeah, then it's not so clear. Yeah, so we kind of like have an underlying at the lowest, the foundation. If that is clear, I think the path is much clearer. Which questions we should ask ourselves? Very important. Yeah. A lot of people don't even ask themselves questions. The next step is asking yourself questions. The next step is knowing which are the right questions at this very moment. And who we are becoming and how we should think about ourselves moving forward? What is the next epigenetic step in my life and in my language learning journey? I think it's always good to know there's really smart people, a lot of wisdom out there in the world. What should I be focusing right now? And what is important at this life stage that I am right now? Okay. If you remember the Deutschberg from the very first session, and it's really simple. Basically, the first in the construction phase, it's a lot about building self-esteem. And I said this early on. So it's really industry. Can I make it? Can I construct sentences? And versus inferiority. And the ideal, you know that you're on a good path when you feel like more and more competent, when you feel more and more you have more self-esteem. And we have talked about self-esteem in the last 2 weeks. And if you feel like that is an issue, keep working on it. If you don't feel competent, if you don't feel uh, that you have like a lot of self-esteem when you speak, keep working on it. If you don't, it will always be a problem. It will never go away. So that is a clear focus that you should have if that is an issue for you. The next one is communication. This is when you start communicating yourself, expressing yourself, and then it's about finding out who you are in this country and in this language. And the last one we can skip for most people. Well, for some here in this course, it's also really important. But then it's really about, okay, connecting with other people and connecting with myself, my German part, and loving who I am in this country, who I am in this place, and loving the other people around me. Yeah, that is how Erikson, I think, fits into the Deutschberg a little bit. And I want to now, how much time do we have? Okay, 7 minutes, good. I want to like just talk about some challenges that I think people have in each phase related to the identity. And the first identity, I think, um, and people sometimes have a hard time getting into this identity is my first identity is a German learner. Yeah, I am a German learner. This is the first identity I have when I start learning a language. You find this, maybe you find it surprising, but some people have a really hard time actually getting into this phase and getting into this mindset. I'm a learner now. And the goals in this phase are competence and self-esteem. The core belief that you have that you should gain at the end of this identity is I can make myself understood in German and I feel good when I do this. What are the challenges that people on an identity level tend to experience? Number one, it is important to learn to separate self-worth from correctness. That is, I think, a lot of people are struggling with. Only when I make correct sentences, that means I feel competent, I feel good. We talked about this last week with the false twin trap. Yeah. But that is, I think, that is a real goal. It is, can I make myself understood? The core belief is not, I am perfect. Yeah. Can I make myself understood? Next challenge. Learn to enjoy speaking German or at least feel comfortable doing so. Yeah. If you don't, you will never find out who you are. You will not make it to the next stage. If your self-esteem is fragile, work consciously and deliberately on strengthening it. We've done this in the last 2 weeks. If you think this was not enough, keep working on this. If you start on your language learning journey with low self-esteem, with a sense of inferiority, you will have an extremely hard time in the identity search, in the fifth phase, and in the next phase when it's about love. You will never feel equal. You will never feel like up to the task. You will always be bothered by this. So this is something you should really focus on, get comfortable. And just to be clear, it's always a good advice to be comfortable, but I really believe that with the path ahead, it's even, I want you to spend even more focus on and pay more attention to now knowing that later it will haunt you if you don't take care of this now. Try to build, and we talked about this with the German team when we talked about belonging, identify domains and islands where confidence can grow safely and sustainably. Yeah, this is, it's first you need people you can feel comfortable with, and self-esteem and competence grows slowly. Yeah, find people like this. This is, I think, if you say, okay, self-esteem is my number one priority, then like you build your language learning journey around this. And develop the experience that your inner sense of ability is increasingly matched by the recognition of others. Find recognition. First, you have to find I can make myself understood, and others have to believe that too. And for that, you have to go out there and let people give you the chance to recognize that you can make yourself understood and that you are somebody who can make it in the world of people and things. That is the first identity, a German learner. And then according to the phases, the next identity is that of a German speaker. And here, the highest goals is that of identity. I know who I am in this country. I know who I am in this country, in this language. And I have fidelity. I can stick with this. This is I understand. This doesn't change anymore who I am. The core belief is I can show myself in German. I know who I am, and I have the linguistic tools to actually show who I am. And the challenges are the following. The belief that your German must be perfect before you start your identity quest. It doesn't have to be. It can't be, yeah? So go out there if you feel like it's good enough. I can start showing myself. This is a lot of people believe this. Oh my, I have to do this and I have to do that before I can do this. No. If you think you're ready, go out there. Your German doesn't have to be perfect before you start trying to find out who you are. When you identify at some point as a German speaker and you identify as somebody before you actually are, because this is part of a journey, yeah, at that point you have to accept that speaking German is no longer primarily about improving German. It is to discover who you are in this language and in this country. And if the self-esteem from the previous phase is fragile, identity exploration becomes much harder. And being not open enough to change due to personality or life circumstances because you are in a foreclosed identity status, yeah, that is also a challenge. And accept your German part as a legitimate part of your identity. That is also something that people struggle with. Okay, I'm afraid let's give me 5 minutes. I'll just jump over this. I don't have time for this. And in every phase of life, one Ericksonian task is in the foreground. In each phase of the language learning process, also a specific virtue becomes especially important. Yeah, in construction, we have competence and self-efficacy. In communication, it's about identity. In participation, it's about love and self-love. And some life stages align really well with language learning, and others don't. And also, some identity statuses align better with language learning than others. Remember, the life stage is stage 4, 5, and 6, and the identity statuses, that was diffusion, foreclosure, moratorium, and achievement. So when you reflect on everything, yeah, about everything we talked about, and let's stay like another 7, 8 minutes on the call if you have. If you reflect on everything we just talked about, the whole thing, ask yourself the question, to what extent does all of this align when you look at your own language learning situation and the phases that you're in and the identity statuses that we've talked about? Do you think that is a good match? Or can you maybe explain some of the issues that you've had by a mismatch between life phase, identity status, and language learning phase? Yeah, are there? No, Sydney, there's one more. Next week we have another one. Yeah, I just seeing her. Um, so how does this all fit together? Do you think there's a mismatch? Do you think there's something we should change? This is, again, something to think about, and maybe we can talk about in the one-on-one that we have for next week. If you haven't signed up for it, please do. We can talk about this and maybe like see, okay, what is there? We need to shift in your, is there like a mismatch? What is the problem? I honestly, I believe more and more that most people's problem go back to some sort of identity issue. I'll just put it plainly. Thesis that I have. The more often you identified moratorium as your identity status, the better your chances are that you are well positioned for the learning process from an identity perspective. Would you agree with this thesis? And number three, where and how could you make adjustments to improve the compatibility between your life stage, your identity status, and your learning phase? Those are the three things we have to like tie together and see if there's anything that just doesn't really come together. Okay, I would say for those who want, let me stop this.